I will say this. I think some evangelical leaders through the years have been suckers for this, because they think being Christ-like is answering to somebody's sensitivities and being nice. I call it ingratiationism. The world is watching.
Yeah.
And after a while, we give away the store. I mean, you'll start doing pronoun courtesy first, and they think that's Christ-like. Or if somebody says, I've been wounded, or oh my sorry, oh my goodness, oh maybe, yes, here, make a movie, we'll fund it, we'll get behind it. And they've been duped.
Far too many souls today stumble blindly through life, starved of splendor, deprived of beauty, and left wallowing in a cultural wasteland devoid of wonder and awe. Awe, once the natural response to the majesty of the divine, has been traded for the petty pursuit of self-fulfillment. Majesty, now a casualty of our narcissistic age, has been tossed aside for cheap self-expression. And pageantry? Well, that's been hijacked by the cult of casualness, where authenticity is mistaken for the sacred art of looking like you just rolled out of bed. The marvels of the divine have been shamefully replaced by humanity's tawdry obsession with its own so-called triumphs, best seen in the circus of sports stadiums and the fantasyland of fictional superheroes. But as creatures made in the image of God, we cannot afford to be ignorant of beauty, misunderstand it, or, God forbid, allow the serpentine voices of modernity to redefine it. As long as beauty is reduced to subjective whimsy, we will remain tragically blind to that which truly reflects the radiant goodness of God. And make no mistake, this blindness has a steep price. In this episode, I am joined by Dr. Mark Coppenger, who is a visiting lecturer in philosophy at New St. Andrews College for the 2024-2025 academic year, bringing with him decades of intellectual firepower, honed at institutions like Wheaton College and two prominent seminaries, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where he retired as professor of Christian philosophy and ethics. But don't be fooled. This isn't just another academic hiding in an ivory tower. Dr. Coppenger has been on the front lines, serving in short-term missions across the globe, from the depths of Brazil's jungles to the sprawling landscapes of Russia, Sudan, Indonesia, Myanmar, Egypt, Belgium, and Romania. A devoted husband to Sharon and the proud patriarch of 3 children and 10 grandchildren, Dr. Coppenger still finds time to shake intellectual rafters at markcoppenger.com, where he posts regularly. Mark Coppenger, welcome to Of Flames and Crowns. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I need to take you around and you introduce me when I go play. That's wonderful.
I'd love to. One of my my great dreams in life is to be some kind of ring announcer for my favorite fighters. So
you've got the voice.
As one of my favorite intellectual ring fighters, I'd love to do introductions for you.
You could do well.
Well, thank you for being here. A question I want to kick this off with is, what recent experiences have you had that have stirred a profound sense of awe and wonder in you?
Well, I tell you, I was in the neighborhood of New St. Andrews, and I knew some folks down here when I was up at Post Falls visiting an old Wheaton colleague, and I thought, I'm so close, I think I'll just drive down there. And I hit the Palouse and these rolling hills of grain, and it was a magic kingdom. As we've moved here, they have farmers market. We've discovered the farmers market. And so right off, we found this to put on our walls. And it's actually on aluminum of all things. But anyway, it's just a scene from the Palouse with a threatening sky and so forth, a beautiful barn. But we're just enthralled by this. It looked like a magic land. So that's one thing. I tell you, it's a few years back, but I was in Ireland. After my mom died, my dad took the kids back, and we were just kind of having a recoup sort of visit into Ireland. And it turns out there's a Coppenger castle in Ireland because somehow Coppengers ended up there from Europe. And so anyway, we were just driving along, and when you drive on what's called the Dingle Peninsula, the roads are so narrow. They're like our roads, just one lane of our road with a line in the middle. And when you turn the rental car in, they see if all the mirrors are still in the car. They're that narrow, you know. But anyway, we came to the place, and they said, Clocher Beach, Clogher. It's down here. And we thought, well, let's just go down to the beach and see. We got down there, and it is one of the most, as the Brits say, gobsmacking things that I've ever seen. The Atlantic is rushing in there, and as it hits the lower ground, it forms seahorses in a sense. They come rocking in, and you feel as though the sea is up here and you're here, and you're going to die, but you can't look away. And we were just like, what? Where has this been? So every once in a while, my son has worked in Southeast Asia and has taught scuba, and he takes his scuba diving now and then, and even someone as clumsy as I can do it, and you see coral down there and all these fish, and so here and there you just run into something and like hold it. And I will say a man-made thing. I was in Barcelona, and there was this really curious cathedral there called Sagrada Familia, and it's kind of like gingerbready stuff, and it's real gnarly in places and tilted, and I mean, but anyway, I went to it as a curiosity, and actually when I got inside, I was just floored by the majesty and beauty of the thing. And so, man-made or natural, I keep getting whacked by beauty.
And at what point can you say that, the field of aesthetics became a particular interest to you? Like,
Yeah,
where does it stem from?
yeah, it's kind of interesting. My parents, I had a grandfather in Detroit, and they every time we would go up there from our southern home, we would go to the Institute of Art or the Detroit Museum of Art, and just I don't know, when I was 5 or 6, we'd be looking at Diego Rivera or Rembrandt or what have you. Um, my grandfather founded the Detroit Economic Club, and he was well off. And he ended up sending our whole family on a trip around the world just as I was coming out of high school, 6 weeks. So I'm looking at Kabuki Theater in Japan and at the Louvre and things like that. So I kind of had that, just nothing I'd studied. It just was there. Um, and I enjoyed it. I appreciated the arts. But I heard something in grad school once. A professor was talking about a colleague who asked another one, do you know Sanskrit, the language? And he said, no, I haven't taught it yet. And so it seems backwards, like you're studying, and then it's the overflow. But again and again, in preaching and teaching, you get the assignment and you rise to it. So anyway, I went to Wheaton, and the guy who taught aesthetics was away finishing his doctorate. Can you do it this semester? I'm like, okay. And so I did. And then I started bringing in colleagues from around, the conservatory guy and literature folks and painters and photographers. And it just became a kind of community of celebrating the arts. And I just said, I really love this. I mean, it's kind of like Eric Liddell, in a funny way, who says in the movie, Jenny says, no, don't go to the Olympics, go to the mission field. She says, oh, Jenny, the Lord made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And he didn't make me fast, but at least I got into it and I just felt pleasure. So this is like 1975. And so I've just been immersed in it.
Well, that's fascinating. So a moment ago, I had asked you about things that have compelled a sense of wonder and awe in you. I'm wondering, in contrast, if you've seen things that have been repelling or that have evoked a sense of disgust as you've seen them.
Yeah, recently, I can't remember whether it was on television or in some kind of magazine, there was an appeal for some kind of treatment for disease or the plight of people. And I'm just thinking like boils or pustules on people or, that kind of thing. I mean, obviously carrion in the middle of the road with maggots or something like that. It is funny though. My wife threatens to turn off the TV when there are ads now because I'm such a critic of ads. It'll be something like, and so now we're not working quite so much with the visual, even though they're very arresting, but the narrative and the old thing about the husband is always the idiot. That's a theme now, and I don't know whether it's something to woman, but I find myself as a kind of a cultural critic, and it's not that they're not high production value productions, but it's like the message. So then you get into literature essentially, and so I get really chapped when the message of I work for Kairos Journal. It's a website involving engagement with the culture critically. And anyway, 2,400 articles up online, kairosjournal.org. And I remember once there's a movie that came out called Brokeback Mountain, and it was really a glorification of homosexuality. And they said, we need some kind of commentary on this. I thought, oh no, I don't want to go see it. So I went in the middle of the afternoon when I paid less, and then I wore these glasses with a funny nose. No, I didn't really, but anyway, so I'm in there, and it's so
full
beautiful.
disguise.
Yeah, that's right. I had a fake mustache. No, anyway, it was beautifully done, but it was such a big lie, and I just still can't get over it, because they'd go to the high country and wonderful, beautiful mountains, and that's where the gay stuff was, and they go back into conventionality with families and commerce, and they put, I think, a dark filter on the camera just to show what drudgery it was, like, oh, the hateful world of like being a good husband and stuff. And I thought, this is the biggest lie. Those things disgust me too, so it's not just visual, of course.
Yeah, it's intriguing. I mean, you and I are very close in age at this point, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, yes.
But
76, and you're,
I'm just give or take,
just give or take a few years. Yes,
I'm somewhere there. I'm just curious to see in the many years God has gifted you life. How much have you seen aesthetics change over the years, if at all?
Yeah. Well, when you look at the galleries, of course, I mean, at the museums, of course, those are collections of things that are highly regarded. But as I've gone along, I've seen novelty and ideology just pushing in. Like, it's even, I tell you, we had poetry majors in my church. I pastored near Northwestern University. And every once in a while, I'd say, does anything rhyme anymore? I said, no, that's been done. It's been done. I mean, so now the guys who rhyme are basically the songwriters, but still. And so a lot of these guys are just saying, oh, it's got to be new. It's got to be edgy. You've got to, and a lot of the edginess is just dreck. And then the ideology, it's so thick. You go, I mean, if I go to the Art Institute of Chicago, you see the classics, the Seurat and the whatever. I mean, it's kind of even in Ferris Bueller, if you've ever seen that movie, where they're looking at the, looking at the afternoon, the pointillism, and Cameron gets closer, closer, closer. So those are the classics there. And they even have American Gothic, the guy with a pitchfork with his daughter, and it's those kinds of things. You go to the Museum of Modern Art in Chicago, and it is so tendentious. It's so preachy. Even the Art Institute was getting that way. They had, for example, one place where they had a big pile of Jolly Rancher candies. I mentioned that in the video before, and you're supposed to take one and eat it. It's like a sacrament where you would think of people who died of AIDS, and it's just a sack of candy. And yet, oh man, we're so edgy. So it's very transgressively preachy, which is so tiresome. Or it's just new. Like, well, yeah, maybe that's why they haven't done it before, because it's worthless.
Yes. Oh, that's an interesting concept. I remember reading something C.S. Lewis had once said. This is particularly about writing stories, and he said he wished that preachers wouldn't write stories because they'd be tempted to preach sermons rather than actually tell good stories. I don't know if you got any commentary of that as you think about art. Is art meant to be, like, what is art meant to be? Like, does that preachiness take away from what art is supposed to be?
Well, I guess I'm talking mainly about preaching a false ideology. I mean, preaching tendentious things. No, I mean, I think a well-crafted sermon with good illustrations and pacing and so forth is a wonderful vehicle of truth. And so I can admire the artistry of a novelist or a documentarian, because they're getting something over. So yeah, it's not, I shouldn't have said preachy probably, but that's but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's preaching.
Yeah, it's pretty fair.
Now, one of the criticisms, of course, of Christian filmmaking, I mean, even back in the Billy Graham times world, you would have kind of a conflict, and then it'd be resolved. It's kind of like a Hallmark thing, and then they walk off into the sunset, and they go to the crusade, and then everything would be wonderful. And I thank God for Billy Graham and conversions and so forth. But they were kind of pat. I mean, in Breakback Mountain, those were cartoon characters, and sometimes our characters have been more cartoony. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with carrying a message and doing it effectively. I was just thinking about movies that sort of turned things upside down a bit. And I mean, even Chariots of Fire when I was in seminary. I mean, that was lifting up the nobility, and I don't think the guy who made it was Christian either. And yet there's an exhilaration that comes from it, and the stand and the purity, and so yeah, I don't mean to push against message.
No, not at all. That's really good. So you've just been talking about ideology. It prompts me to think of Francis Schaeffer. You know, one of my favorites. And he did this series, How Then Should We Live?
Right.
And he did this incredible job of showing the correlation between ideas and art. And I suppose I have a very speculative question as I think about this. If he was alive today, and he did one more chapter to sort of describe the current age, right, the prevalent theologies, and the art that accompanies those ideologies, what do you imagine he would say?
Yeah, no, I think it would just be Candyland for him. I mean, he'd take you to the latest museum and say, see, I told you, that kind of thing. So history has been kind to him in terms of his prophetic word. Boy, I could think of so many examples. I will say this about Schaeffer's. I had some contact with him when he came to campus after he did Whatever Happened to the Human Race. It was kind of a pushback against abortion. He spoke in chapel, and he was ailing at this time. He was, I forget what it was, but it was going to claim his life. And so, but I went up there and I said, could you come talk to my bioethics class? Because he'd just done this. Well, Edith looked daggers through me. I mean, she's like, you're wearing my husband out. He will die sooner. I said, that's okay. No, I didn't say that's okay, but he did go. And he and Edith were up on stage, and they were very, very good. And since then, I've had a lot of contact in different settings with Os Guinness and with Udo Mittelmann, who were associated with Labrie. We philosophers in the philosophy department there were asked to go into the churches and lead the discussion afterwards. And that's when they showed movies reel to reel. And so I did it at College Church in Wheaton, right across from the campus, and also the Plymouth Brethren, easy for me to say, Plymouth Brethren Church. I think it was called Bethany Chapel down the way. And I think I did one more. And we appreciated Francis. For one thing, when we were kids, Christian literature was basically devotional literature. It was like Hind's Feet in High Places, or, just inspirational thing, or even through Gates of Splendor, which is wonderful, about Nate Saint and Jim Elliott and the Alka Indians and this kind of thing. But this guy shows up when I'm in grad school or college, I can't remember when exactly, and he's like banging Kant in the face and, blowing up Rousseau and wait, Christians can't do that. And he's like, you want to say it again? And so that was exhilarating that we could be engaged. So that was a great thing. But anyway, when they had the series, each one of us leading, we had a kind of hitch in our spirit. Steve Evans was a Kierkegaard scholar, but Kierkegaard, I was told how they say it. I went to Copenhagen once, and they said it's Kubenau, so they need to get hooked on phonics over there in Denmark. But anyway, he just said, here's Kierkegaard, and he did this, and the next thing you know, you've got Sartre, and like whoa. He did a few things. I mean, read Fear and Trembling. I mean, come on. So Art Holmes was our chairman, a Brit, and there's a scene in which Francis comes banging in. Here's Aquinas scribbling away, and bang, he walks in with his little Swiss short pants, and says, this guy is elevated, raised up to the scripture, and he's ruined everything. And and Art Holmes is like, yeah, but you should read Summa Theologica, treatise on law. I mean, yeah. And then he basically, I was teaching aesthetics. So he's going after the David, and David didn't really look like that, and this is an ideal or whatever. And he said, Abrek the hair, and basically Dutch Northern Renaissance. And it's like I said, yeah, but I mean, there is a place for non-representation, and I can appreciate a Mondrian, which is not a picture of anything, and so it was almost like Francis was kind of doing this with a machete, and we're saying, look, maybe let's do a little scalpel here and there. So, but still, it would just be like catnip for his case, and of course he was very big. Frankie was big in the arts. Frankie's gone some interesting places, but you had all these European guys going around, and so he could connect up with them by talking about existentialism and art. But yeah, in some cases it's like, thank you, Francis, but we'll take it from here.
That's interesting. So Dr. Coppenger, we live in a very postmodern era. In an era where people hate truth and seek to undermine and disregard it at every level. Do you think that's had a significant impact on beauty and aesthetics generally? And if so, how do you see this specific expression today?
Yeah, I think there is a way. Of course, there's a lot of money behind the people who are producing art and film, media, a variety of things, academia. Um, a lot of money behind the lies that they are telling about man and the postmodern things. There's no overarching meta narrative, and so they're just grinding out their stuff. Personal expression is the thing. I mean, you associate it with Pollock. You just sort of slinging paint, and like, well, do you feel better? Yes, but actually, some of the stuff ends up looking pretty good. But yeah, people are emoting, and they're not only saying I don't know the truth, kind of a skeptical thing, but they are actually attacking anyone who presumes to know it. I remember when we watched Chariots of Fire. They came to our seminary back in probably 1982, and they had free showing for all the seminary students, and you get a bag of popcorn, and we could go out. And so we were watching this thing, and we thought, later on, he's going to end up drunk with a prostitute or something in Paris or something, because we know how the devout Christian comes off. I watch BritBox now, and some of that Acorn and some of those guys, and the priest is always just feckless and pathetic, and you see this in movies. But anyway, we kept waiting at the end of Chariots of Fire. They were kind of honoring him in a cathedral, and okay, where's the next reel where they defame him and they find his hidden letters or something?
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, he's not a creep.
Yeah.
And so you see this stuff, and they hammer, again, defaming. Actually, one who's raised in the South, we get a little tired of their just making everybody down there look like knuckle-dragging deplorables. They're extraordinary people. So a lot of money behind this, and they are cranking out stuff. Some of it is splendidly engaging, even sitcoms. I mean, you'll take just totally immoral people like in Friends or Two and a Half Men or Seinfeld or something, and vacuous people, and yet so charming. So yeah, they marshal a lot of stuff in the service of lies. And I don't know if I've answered your question so much. But it slowly, I think, we're kind of getting the hang of it a bit more. There's that church, and I forget the name of it, in Georgia, that was turning out some things with their own people. And then I saw a really great production, and they showed it in Nashville. It was crowdfunded, about the Gosnell, I think, Philadelphia abortion stuff. And one of the famous actors has been in a lot of stuff. Came there, he was part of the crowdfunding, and here and there. And one I saw recently about trafficking kids out of South America, I think it was.
I'm trying to remember the name of that.
Yeah.
The Sound of Freedom?
Something, I think it was Sound of Freedom. So slowly we're getting the hang of it, and this isn't necessarily the best word, but there's more verisimilitude. There's greater grittiness. You're showing warts along with the other, and yet it has. I'm just very encouraged by this, that we're kind of learning the craft. And meanwhile, Hollywood is just making itself ridiculous. I mean, anymore, they just seem to be turning out the next Marvel this and Swing from the Building that, and a little bit of that goes a long way, but they just keep cranking these sequel, different fixtures, like here's the Lone Ranger and Batman and Martians or something. And like, okay, how many ways can you do that? And I feel badly for them in that they don't know how to deal with the subtleties of a Christian's moral struggles inside or theology. And it's like trying to teach a cat algebra to get those producers there to turn out something that is truthful, and yet they keep grinding. But they're having a hard time. Mm-hmm. And with streaming too. I mean, you go to the theaters, we've been to a couple of flicks here, you could just, sling a cat in there and nobody complained. And so they're in trouble. I'm glad.
Yeah. I'm glad. I mean, this sounds like a very optimistic perspective. I mean, it seems like you're very optimistic about what Christians could do in a time
and
like
starting
this.
to do.
And on the other side, people who are not God-fearing seemingly struggling
Yeah.
to actually make good art, you know?
Yeah, you wonder what prompts awakening. Sometimes they say the darkness is greatest just before the dawn. And they have pushed it so far with the trans stuff and, these garish people reading to kids in a library. And I saw, what was it? They took, I think they took like Aunt Jemima off one kind of thing, but then they put RuPaul on another sort of thing. Okay, you have two black people there, but this is a cross-dresser and a trans person. And now we're celebrating that. I think it was on a Cheez-It box. We've kind of lost our minds, and even non-believers. You have, like, I don't know, Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or even Bill Maher. Others are saying, "What's going on here? You've lost your minds." And I'm thinking part of it is like, stop it, and part of it is like, no, just keep it up, because I think we're getting close to vomiting up what they've been serving us.
Right. Why do you think we swallowed it in the first place? Like, how did we find ourselves where we are now? How did we develop such poor taste?
Yeah.
That it's required a pretty severe regurgitation to even get rid of it, you know? What happened to us?
Well, I think a lot of things flowed into it. I mean, I do think that the seductions of the 60s are, feel good. What is it? Tune in, something, something, drop out, the feel good drugs, but also just, sex, drugs, and rock and roll are enticing and alluring. And there's a bit of that. So there's kind of the corruption of the spirit. I will say this. I mean, this may be a good sort of reflection. I remember some of the best spiritual experiences I had in my youth were at church camps or boys church camps, and we would meet in a rude tabernacle out in the woods with a tin roof, so to speak, and just dirt floor and no benches. And I just remember singing "Send the Light" with just fervor and being moved and making lifelong commitments. And those aren't cathedrals. Cathedrals are expensive and they take forever to build. And centuries. And now you're exactly right. And I think they're still working on some. I don't know, St. John the Divine, or if the National Cathedral is still doing stuff. But anyway, you go in there and you can kind of rattle around there. They might have a few old saints praying up here and somebody wandering around the holy water or something. But it's like, this is pretty nice, but is anybody getting saved? That kind of thing. So part of it is just like, maybe if we have $1 million, we ought to plant a bunch of new churches. So in a good sense of pragmatics, there's a bit of that, but it becomes short-sighted, I think. I just think there's, the rise of the nuns, and not NUNS, but NONES, that there's just not a taste for revealed truth, divine scripture, and we're pushing the edges of, it's the old Gramsci march through the, well, not just Gramsci, but the critical theory thing, where you're marching through all the institutions and you're corrupting the film industry, corrupting academia, and you wake all of a sudden and the termites have taken it down. So I don't think we've been vigilant. I will say this. I think some evangelical leaders through the years have been suckers for this, because they think being Christ-like is answering to somebody's sensitivities and being nice. I call it ingratiationism. The world is watching. Yeah. And after a while, we give away the store. You'll start doing pronoun courtesy first, and they think that's Christ-like. Or if somebody says, "I've been wounded," or "Oh, my soul," oh my goodness, oh, maybe, yes, here, make a movie, we'll fund it, we'll get behind it. And they've been duped, I think. So sometimes the shepherds hadn't helped us.
Yes, indeed. Do you think there's something in a body of theology that lends itself to that way of thinking, or is it something else? Is it just perhaps a poor strategy in trying to reach the world, and that's all it is? Or is there something missing in our understanding of theology and philosophy that lends itself to that way of thinking?
Well, I think I was in a seminar once, a doctoral seminar back at the seminary, and and I think we probably had 15 in the room. We were talking about some issue, and they wouldn't venture to talk. They'd be afraid that they'd be shot down or something. And so I went to lunch, and I wrote down on a napkin 10 things that can initiate conversation. And like, what are the implications? What do you mean by that word? Have you considered this paradigm? But you said this a minute ago. How is that coherent? Anyway, 10 things, and I think that we have not been as critically discursive, where we'll try things on. I think we're much more taken by PowerPoint, kind of like, okay, I need to take my notes. Okay, it's test time. Okay, blah, 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 blah. And there's that. I also read that I think it's something like in 1950, the average kid who went through high school and college wrote like 9 papers, and it kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So now it's more like 2 or 3 for high school and junior high. For one reason, grading is hard, but the other thing is, a lot of times the teachers couldn't write a good one themselves,
right?
And so forth. So those are exercises in discursive thinking and circumspection and the like. So I think that discourse has slipped a bit. I mean, I will say this. I talked about the tabernacle, and I think more people were moved there. And here's the cathedral. I mean, I think there are rocks on both sides, and when we lift up as the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, and I think it's a mistake to put beauty as high as the others. It's kind of like the Bible, as I said in that video down at Cape Coral. The Bible is huge on truth and against the deluder, and he's the father, and the way, the truth, the life, and also morality and righteousness and justice and so forth. Not quite as big as blessed are the autistically sensitive. I mean, it's and there are a lot of warnings too in there. I did a couple of books.
Yeah.
I would just want to read from one of them.
Yes, please, go ahead.
In an aesthetics class. Some people say aesthetics, and I think, that's good too, but that's a different thing.
That's a different study altogether, yes.
But anyway, I taught with a guy in the conservatory, and we came up with 20 cranky questions about the arts in the church.
Lovely.
And regularly principle, and what about that, and what about depictions of Christ, and shouldn't the church have other priorities, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting battleground.
Yeah.
But there's a quote.
So what's the name of this book?
Oh, this is just A Skeptic's Guide to Arts in the Church, Ruminations on 20 Reservations. Okay. But this one is fun. I was in Myanmar with some of our PhD students in theology and the arts, and they had gotten their degrees. And so one of them said, why don't we get all the guys who did these, and gals, who did these dissertations in the arts, and get them together, get the gang back together, and do a book. And we got some faculty members too, and came up with apologetical aesthetics, using, I think you saw a copy of that. But there's a quote in here from C.S. Lewis, which I think is important. He says, I disliked very much, he went to a little church, a little Anglican church. He says, I disliked very much their hymns, which I considered to be fifth-rate poems set to sixth-rate music. But as I went on, I saw the great merit of it. I came up against different people of quite different outlooks and different education. And then, gradually, my conceit just began peeling off. I realized that the hymns, which were just sixth-rate music, were nevertheless being sung with devotion and benefit by an old saint in elastic-sized side boots in the opposite pew, and then you realize you aren't fit to clean those boots. And so we can be very drawn to being aesthetes. And I remember when they had 911, and you had the blue sky in the World Trade Center, and these jets coming in, explosion of yellow flame, or orange flame. One of the guys in Europe said, yeah, it's too bad about the lives, but wow, what an aesthetic thing. And so it's when your aesthetics become so high that they appreciate
become the
it.
Supreme ethic.
Yeah, but we're leaving this church because we don't like, the cantata they chose or something. And then all of a sudden, interest in beauty or winsomeness can trump, these other things. So there are rocks on both sides.
Which kind of explains why many cathedrals are empty today.
Yeah.
I mean, the splendor is still there, right? But there's not many people attending churches. Many of them are just turned into museums and monuments now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I had a friend who was from Greece, and I've been to pretty heavy Orthodox
Yeah.
countries, Romania and Greece. And there's some wonderful places with icons, and they have that separating kind of rail with iconography and this and that. And one guy was pretty keen on it. And there's kind of a rebirth of more evangelical Orthodox thinking, the Antiochian Orthodox here. But he went over there and he says, it's just blue hairs. I mean, it's just kind of dear old ladies. And so you kind of give me, you know, a little kind of ratty place in a strip mall that, you know, went bad, and now they're renting out to the church. They say that's the death knell of a strip mall if you see a church in it. And you go in there and there's just the Spirit of God is alive. So you just have to guard yourself, because you can get real snotty in the arts. Oh my goodness. You know?
Right. Oh, you're so right. And then I guess the other temptation is to go to the other extreme. Where we then think it's all about truth and no beauty whatsoever. One of the ways that I see this is the kinds of churches who the emphasis is on preaching, and almost the singing doesn't matter at all. You know, that's just one expression.
Or it's all at 7-Eleven.
Yes.
7 phrases sung 11 times, and it's just, you know. And the old thing where you can substitute any product for the Lord in it, and it still makes sense, where it's just like a jingle or something like that instead of Mighty Fortress or whatever.
Right, exactly. Now, how do we go from having influential people like Bach or Shakespeare, who were very influential in their times? Like, if you wanted the best poetry, Shakespeare. If you wanted the best music, Bach. And now it seems like Christians are playing catch up when it comes to the arts. Why? And it seems like this has happened. I mean, the grand scheme of history, it seems like we have got to this point very, very quickly. How do we get here? And how do we recover that ability to influence culture artistically?
Just in terms of excellence. And it's interesting. We go to the Nashville Symphony when we're in town. But believe it or not, Nashville has a symphony. It's not all just country music or honky tonk.
Good to know.
they do a great job. As if, you know, I don't appreciate country music. But as we go in there, it is interesting how they do go back again and again. Every year, the National Symphony will put on Messiah by Handel, you know, and we'll have other evidences of faith and composers who did wonderful things. And quite often, when they have a modern composer, I mean, you're just thinking about there are any number of these guys, and it's really just not satisfying. It's experimental, and they have discord and atonality and awkward pauses, and that's heavy. But I think, again, it's kind of like the readings of the trans in the library to the kids, that the products of modern symphonic work are quite often off-putting, or you have to kind of strain to care. I think that's one reason country music is done so well. And George Bush once said they tell a story, and so you can you know, like, at least he's conveying, I don't know, pride in nation, or hung a yellow ribbon on the old oak tree. Guy came back and now, no, you're accepted. I mean, there are gospel themes in that. And so I think there's a hunger out there, and sometimes the seculars are forced to go back, and they'll play Bach, or we will have, you know, some Shakespearean thing, and Merry Wives of Windsor, or you know, Henry V. I mean, people remember it's the fifth. I get my Henrys mixed up, but the Band of Brothers talk, and you know, and any man in a bed today in England will count his manhood's chief if he is not with us here, you know, and so on St. Crispin's Day. I think it's a constant reminder, like, you guys aren't doing it. You aren't doing it. You know, it's kind of interesting in Christian hymnody, for example. I know there's here particularly, there's a lot of good going back to the Herb does some wonderful arrangements that we sing. I think some of the Getty stuff in Christ Alone is a very much latter-day thing, and yet that Celtic thing has some excellence. And again, I think some Christian films are starting. We're starting to do it, but I think the competition is becoming less and less impressive.
Sure.
And even the secular people are noticing.
Yes.
I guess I'm being Pollyanna here, but
well, you know. Yeah. So you've been around the world. Is there a continent you haven't been to yet? I suppose Antarctica.
Antarctica that's the one. Yep.
Okay. So you've seen a lot. Of the things that you've seen, what has made the greatest impressions to you? And I'm also kind of asking this in the context of culture, and which cultures really stand out to you as having a rich influence of truth, beauty, and goodness. Perhaps not in perfection necessarily, but some expression of that.
Yeah, I mean the big return on this is it makes me so grateful for the culture that we still have. I mean, we call ourselves a cut flower civilization. The bloom is, we were a rose once and it's been snipped and now, but I guess in each one I found, I mean, just off the top of my head, I hadn't even thought about this one, but I mean, in Japan, just the cleanliness and the beauty of the gardens they prepare and the little bonsai trees and the Kyoto temples and these things. So that's neat. And it's one thing about Japan though is some countries you go to and you try their language, and they will look at you like you are soiled by language. I mean, in Brazil though, you'll say, "Meu nome é Marcos Coppenger." Tudo bem, tudo bom. Like, oh, the bunch of people look at the guy. In France, not so much. You try to order in French, and they'll say, "Please, let me say it in English. You are disgusting me."
Yeah.
Japan is the coldest place and one of the most racist places I've ever seen.
Interesting.
I don't think a Korean can become a citizen there, but you can walk all around Tokyo and maybe see like 6 black people and 12 white people in a day or something. Not, I mean, those are crude categories, but it is so racially insular in a way. But I drive a Honda and I've had a Corolla. I mean, there are things. Okay. In Africa, I just, I've done stuff in Sudan. I biked up the Nile in Egypt, but that's kind of Middle East. Sure. But yeah, just the warmth of the fellowship, the tenderness. I remember we were with a guy in the back streets of Khartoum one day, and he talked about how he had dreams, and it was like a boogeyman every night. He was terrified. And then one night the boogeyman chased him across the creek, and out of the vegetation stepped Isa. He'd read about him in the Quran, and the boogeyman ran away. And he woke up and he said, "I must know about Isa," and he became a Christian. And as we were in his little house there on the outskirts of Khartoum, he brought a Coca-Cola out for each of us, which was a big investment for him. Yeah. And he talked about when he converted, the family turned him into the cops. Wow. And they were questioning him, and then they slugged him in the stomach. He was sitting in a chair, and the breath came out, whatever. It sounded like better in Arabic, or whatever the line, I guess it was Arabic. And they thought he said better, but he didn't say anything. Yeah. And they said, "Oh, you think you're better than us?" And they slugged him, and he fell back and hit his head on the wall. And he told us, and he smiled, and it was just Beatitudes, blessed are those who are persecuted. And he told that with such warmth. And we think like the slightest slight, and then we get all verklempt and have to go to bed or something. And the vitality and the joy of those people. And then I've worked with Peter Akinola, the Archbishop of Nigeria, Anglican. Yeah. And there are more Anglicans worshiping in Nigeria on Sunday morning than there are Anglicans and Episcopalians worshiping in both Europe and North America put together.
Wow. Yeah.
And by the way, some of the guys got real snotty, like some of the Anglicans here, like, well, there's several of them, right? And they would say, "We're not going to send you any more money if you don't grow up and quit opposing homosexuality." Yeah. And they sent the money back. It's kind of like at Wrigley Field. If the other team hits home run, you throw the ball back on the field. And they don't care. They said, "You send us this Bible and said you should believe it. We do. What happened to you?" So that genuineness of the faith there. I'm taking too long, but just roundabout. And Russia, the same sort of vitality among the persecuted people. Again, Russia has the Kremlin. I've been in there, and pretty amazing buildings that the communists didn't build, and so forth. But you take a sample here and there, and just, I mean, the Eiffel Tower in South America, just the friendliness of the people, the openness. And by the way, they are not racially sensitive down there in the same way we are. Just blacks and whites marrying in all kinds of shades. It's just like whatever. Um, anyway, but overall, coming home, I've gotten a rat bite in a hotel in Egypt. I got hepatitis from some friendly villagers who brought pudding to us in the Amazon region. Um, it's just in terms of medicine, you know, operating bridges. I mean, things like that are just the Judeo-Christian tradition has produced a lot of great stuff.
Incredible.
And when the Cairo Symphony does their thing, they bring in Haydn and stuff like that. I'm rambling now,
Isn't that amazing?
But again, I thank God what I see here.
Oh, that's spectacular. I have a philosophical question for you.
Okay.
Just around the contrast between the subjectivity of beauty.
Yeah.
In contrast to beauty that can only emanate from divine revelation. Is beauty something that can be subjective in any ways? Is there room for a category of subjective beauty, or is it something that can only be understood and appreciated at an objective level?
Yeah, no, I think it's objective, but before I forget, I brought something I wanted to share real quick. I'm not sure Francis Schaeffer would love this painting, but my music minister in Evanston ran a gallery, and he was an artist, and he worked in encaustic, which is tar and wax.
Wow.
And he says I can buy my supplies at Home Depot instead of an art shop. But anyway, he did this one, and I said, I'd like that. I mean, and he sold it to me at a very, very good price. But anyway, it had another name, but I changed it to the Valley of the Shadow, and it hangs in our house. And that's just wax and tar and label. And it reminds me of in the Valley of the Shadow of Death or despondency, the presence of God is there. And it is kind of, it's not a real good snapshot of it. It's not like Durer's hair where, he does a very careful rabbit thing or something. And yet, it's more impressionistic in some respects. But anyway, so I just want to
I love it.
Say I love Dan Addington Galleries, Chicago. But subjectivity. I actually spoke in it. As I got into aesthetics, I just thought, oh my goodness, here's Francis Schaeffer, and this is good art, this is bad art, what's not art, and all that. So I ventured a paper I read at the American Philosophical Association in Cincinnati, probably 1980, something like that. And it's kind of stuck with me, and actually it has a debt to an atheist philosopher named David Hume, of all things. He was a skeptic. But I compared aesthetic goodness to redness, the fact that something's red. And when something's red, that means it appears red, and appearance is a pretty big deal with red under certain conditions. I mean, under sodium vapor light, a car that's red may appear black or, or whatever. And then it's to most people because there's color blindness. So he didn't see it red. And going to the Army, we had a little test, can you see the number in the middle of the dots and so forth. And so it doesn't mean you're evil. It's just like you won't be able to read the instruments. So I said, that's kind of it, that it appears it's fascinating, it's compelling, it's engaging, it's charming in a sense. The opposite of boring, for example. When viewed in a certain way. I mean, if you're a doctor and you're looking at someone and he's got a flushed face, you're really thinking fever. You're not focusing. But if you focus on it, and it's for most people. Well, I think God's made us that way, that if something is, a classic is a sunset. And is it I don't think that there's particularly a metaphysical thing in the sunset that is beautiful, kind of like a Platonic or Aristotelian form or whatever. I just think God has wired it so that we like sunsets, and he gives us sunsets. And that doesn't mean everybody likes a sunset. But the consensus is a sunset is better than dog vomit running down a dirty alley. And so, if we call everybody, go, well, guys, look here, we're up on the hill, we're looking at the Palouse, and there's a sunset over Pullman over there. And we say, oh, wow, like that. And one guy say, whatever, and he sees this squirrel that got run over there, and his guts are out, and he said, hey, come look at this. Now, he may be a doctor looking at internal organs, but in terms of aesthetics, or he just said, so what, then you don't think, oh, we were wrong. Beauty's subjective. No, It's just that he's beauty blind. And so I think that
Yes.
God, it's more of a sign of God's love for us
Mm.
in that it's kind of like Christmas morning. You think you want a bike and you like whatever, some kind of electronic game, or you'd like a new sweater or something like that. And you have that desire, and you don't want a dead cat. You don't want, calf's liver,
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And you come down and like, got a bike. I got that. So he puts this, and it's a sign to me of his love.
Yeah.
Similarly, if I'm an anglerfish at the bottom of the ocean that have a fake lure up here and teeth like alien or something, well, there's another anglerfish, and he says, I believe I'd like to be around that.
Yes.
And so he wires them, and cows are attracted to cows, and pigs are attracted to slop, and I'm attracted to sunsets, and my wife Sharon. And he says, guess what? Like Adam said when he brought Eve, he says, now bone of my bones, but I think he says, now you're talking. I've seen the giraffe, the hippopotamus, I've seen the oak tree.
This is it.
Yes, sir. And so God said, you're welcome. So I think it's not subjective, but it's based upon fascination or you can be fascinated with Gaper's block at a terrible wreck, but we're talking about a compelling fascination, not anyway.
Yeah.
So and by the way, non-Christians have that capacity too.
Right.
That you can, in fact, that's actually an outreach or something. You can bring somebody to the concert like we had at the start of the year of fight song, battle songs, you remember?
Yes.
And you could bring somebody from Idaho who doesn't appreciate the Lord, but he thinks, I didn't know the Polonaise from that. I didn't know this and that. And oh, what a wonderful thing. Yeah. They've got the wiring too.
Yes. How does one train their senses to really appreciate beauty?
Yeah. I think part of what you do, look, how does one train himself to appreciate a football game? Or I went to a rugby game the other day. I've seen rugby, but I didn't know the rules.
Yeah.
And I didn't appreciate it nearly as much as the person who knew the rules. Like the ball's down on the ground. Wait, where are they? They're huddled around. Wait, it just popped out. What's going on here? And so if I knew the rules, watching football, I've learned so many things about the nickel defense and about, the slot and a long pass and a safety valve and a screen pass and all. And the more you know, the more you can attend to the details of it. I brought these as a little show and tell here. Okay.
Let's do it.
One of my little kicks, and I don't think this is an arrogant thing. I hope it's not, because it's just fun. I like to collect caps at art museums. Okay. So I just happen to have two of them that I brought. And I have them from the Brink Museum and the Whitney in New York and the Phillips in D.C. and all over the place. So I have my Kimball Art Museum. Yeah. I went to seminary in Fort Worth. I just like the olive drab, and it kind of fits my little bald head. But that's a great collection.
Nice.
And then I was in New York, and I went to the Guggenheim, which is done by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it, it's kind of a spiral. So I got that. And it's not as though when I walk the streets of Nashville, I want people to know I've been to New York, but it's a cool cap.
Yeah.
And I stopped at the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City on the way up here. So I got that. Yeah. So part of it is you just get around, expose yourself to it.
It's good.
And when I took the students sometimes to these places, I'll say, okay, they're just, a lot of them are like, never been in a museum and, whatever. This is not my place. Let's go down to pizza place. Yeah. I'll say, all right, just pick a painting in here, in this room.
Yes.
With the understanding you can't sell it, you can't hide it. You have to put it over in a prominent place in your house for a year. And lo and behold, they'll rise to the occasion. Well, since you ask, I kind of like the one with the horse there or something, and it kind of gets them into it. But I watch a lot of football, and there's also a thing called kinesthetic sympathy. And when you study philosophy of the arts, you get into this. Kinesthetic has to do with kinesiology, your muscles.
Movement.
So, yes,
motion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have ever thrown a pass on a spiral, you may not be Ben Roethlisberger or Aaron Rodgers or, whatever, but you know what that feels like. And so if you've ever done or if you've ever played an instrument, or if you've ever done some sketches or something like that, then you realize I really can't do that. I played trumpet. my one claim to fame is I was in a band with Bill Clinton once, and not a small band. It was the Arkansas All-State Band, and he played tenor sax, and I played trumpet. So it's 70 of our closest friends.
Wow.
But still, I was a hornblower or such. So when I go hear Haydn's Trumpet Concerto or something like that, I can feel along with it. I'm really not good at drawing, but I can take a photograph now and then and say, that kind of turned out. I think, oh, look what Ansel Adams does. So part of it is that you can feel along with the artists and even admire them more. I think.
Absolutely. Just as we wrap up this conversation, I'm curious to know what Christians can do to spearhead a higher order of aesthetics in their personal lives, in their homes, in their churches, in their public squares at large. One of the things that comes to mind for me is something like architecture.
Yeah.
I suppose one of my pet peeves is to sort of look at housing and sort of try to interpret what kind of ideas translated into housing. These days, because of modernity, we see a lot of housing that you can see as very functional. There's space to park a car and go to bed. You're not expected to know your neighbors, so you don't build front porches anymore, that kind of thing.
Right.
I think of that as one of those tangible things that can be done. But just what else can Christians be doing in their daily lives to leave aesthetic impressions on the world?
Yeah, good question. Oh, one thing I want to pitch in real quick. Within aesthetics, there's a lot more than beauty at play. Yes. I mean, to say beauty is the point of every single thing misses a lot of the craft and artistry that goes into making other compelling things. So it's kind of like saying everything is cool. You need to get a thesaurus. Like, hey, this water this is a cool drink of water. Like, hey, that hat's cool. Like, man, I like the way these lights are. Somebody did some cool work here. Like, so we talk about, and there's even a category of like profound ugliness. And so I think of Schmeagol in Lord of the Rings, they nailed that. Right. I mean, you're transfixed by that, and that's a good piece of work. Or even, what was it, Dr. Orlok or something in Nosferatu, or kind of Frankenstein, in those movies. Yeah. Wow, you nailed that monster or something. So, and then also there's the beauty of ruins and beauty of jokes, a well-crafted joke, the timing and everything. So it's a broad subject. But your question again, I'm sorry, I went off on
how Christians can.
Part of it is, it hit me when I was at Wheaton once. I was sitting around the house studying at night, and I had an old raggedy sweatshirt and I had some sweatpants I'd painted in, and it had paint on it, and I was just sitting there, and I thought, in our ethical framework, my only chance for romance is with my wife here. I mean, this is licit, and she has to look at this, and so I thought, I'm being aesthetically irresponsible because people have to look at me or something like that. Yeah. And we're so much into expression or authenticity. Like they taught us in seminary, authenticity is not the standard rule. Just do whatever you feel like doing. You go to a hospital room like, oh no, this is worse than I thought. I hope you recover. No, you don't do that. And if you want to sit on the bed, you don't sit on the bed and bounce or something. Right. So anyway, part of being mature is being thoughtful outside of your own comfort zone. And so you think about, how do I present myself with architecture? Yes. Architecture isn't just like, oh, here's a painting, fine, let's just toss it somewhere. Like, no, I mean, it's expensive and it's there. So what is it about being humane in architecture and thoughtful? We live up in an apartment on, what do they call it, Fort Russell, up the hill. Yeah. We walk all around there. That is amazing. Yeah. I mean, the trees are beautiful. Yes. Thank you for planting trees. There's some real strange, curiosity, eccentric things, and there's some mansions and the like. Yeah. And yet, we're just so thankful for what they gave us. So I think a lot of what we need to think of in architecture is just thoughtfulness to the people. And there was a school of architecture called Bauhaus, and there's a book about it called Living Machines. And if form follows function, if you can't name exactly what that does, then don't put it in the house. It's just frivolous. Yeah. And so the people who do gingerbread kind of cutting on Victorian houses and have a big porch where you can imagine being on that porch. That's not only good for the people who live in it. The rest of us, we just like to walk around and say, boy, this is super. And it's really thoughtfulness to your neighbors and not just yourself, I think.
Right.
So yeah. And by the way, a couple of my recitation guys, they are really pumped up on architecture. And I will say this. I mean, it is fun to have a neighborhood where everything is Georgian architecture, the red brick British with the chimneys I like, or whatever. Jerusalem is all, they call it, I think, Jerusalem stone or something. There's a certain, when you're on the Mount of Olives, there's a certain look. It's all kind of, and that's charming. But Frank Gehry does some that have kind of whimsy. I mean, they're kind of twisted and leaning a little bit. Yeah. And they're not, it's not like, oh, he blew it. It's like, no, he's kind of horsing around a little bit. So there's room for horsing around. And Chicago skyline has, well, even London skyline. You got the London Eye, which is a big deal, but then you got the Gherkin and St. Paul's. I mean, it's fun. Variety's fun too.
Variety is fun. Well, Dr. Coppenger, thank you. Appreciate your time.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for
asking. It's been a really good time.
I appreciate it. If somebody asked me to say silent prayer, I'm honored. So I'm pleased to talk with you. Thanks.
No,
thanks, Lennox.
Thank you for being here.